also be talking today a lot about President Trump, who has blasted the US Supreme Court justices. Now, that in itself is incredibly unusual.
Not meant to do that.
You're really not meant to do that. Anyway, because they've struck down most of his global tariffs.
Yes, the US president replaced the tariffs then with a temporary 10% global import duty over 150 days for all countries. Apparently that's something he can do without congressional permission. Let's take a listen to his announcement.
We're going straight ahead with 10% straight across the board, which was the absolute right to do. And that's taking place. That's a lot of money coming into our country. And then during that period of about 5 months, we are doing the various investigations necessary to put fair tariffs or tariffs, period, on other countries. So we're doing that period, but we're immediately instituting the 10% provision, which we're allowed to do. And in the end, I think we'll take in more money than we've taken in before.
Yeah, well, maybe they will, but they also might have to give back something like $150 billion.
Yes.
So
Ouch.
it's all a bit of a mess. Anyway, Ben Leo has the latest from Washington.
Good morning from The Late Show Live here in Washington, D.C. It's been a momentous day here in America with the Supreme Court ruling on President Trump's tariff. They said this morning, sorry, Mr. President, these are illegal because, long story short, he invoked the tariffs on countries all around the world using emergency legislation. This morning, the Supreme Court, they voted 6-3 to say, nope, you can't do that. So it was a bit of a blow this morning to President Trump. There were reports from cable news networks here in America that he was effing and blinding the president about the courts in disgust. Hours later, though, he took to the podium at the White House here in DC and he said, do you know what? The court's decision was disgusting. He said the judges, their families, even going as far to say the families of the judges should be embarrassed and ashamed of them. But he said, I've got a trick up my sleeve. And the trick is I'll be using 2 different pieces of alternative legislation to continue with these tariffs on nations all around the world. And as a reaction, he'll be whacking 10% tariffs on every country worldwide, effective from Monday, using the 1972 Trade Tariff Act. That will come into effect on Monday. As I said, it can be effective for 150 days. And during that 150-day period, President Trump will move the old tariffs on the old previous illegal legislation and move them onto the alternative pieces of legislation. So as far as President Trump is concerned, he woke up, he had a bad day, he turned it round, and he's spinning it as a massive win for his administration.
Right, our main news this morning is about a furious President Trump who's blasted the US Supreme Court justices for striking down most of his global tariffs.
Yeah, the US president replaced the tariffs with a temporary 10% global import duty, which he can do apparently, over 150 days for all countries. Let's take a listen to what he said.
We're going straight ahead with 10% straight across the board, which was the absolute right to do. And that's taking place. That's a lot of money coming into our country. And then during that period of about 5 months, we are doing the various investigations necessary to put fair tariffs or tariffs, period, on other countries. So we're doing that period, but we're immediately instituting the 10% provision, which we're allowed to do. And in the end, I think we'll take in more money than we've taken in before.
Let's talk to former Immigration Minister Kevin Foster. Kevin, good morning to you. What do you make of all of this? I mean, it seems an absolute mess in a way, and yet he's determined to sort of carry on regardless.
Yeah, it's classic Donald Trump. You know, when something goes his way, it's fantastic, brilliant, and everyone's made the right decision. When it doesn't, it's all an absolute disgrace, and everyone involved in it's an absolute disgrace. You know, certainly Trump isn't someone who sticks to the sort of political norms, and let's be honest, that's why he got elected, actually. Is a lot of people quite like the idea that someone says what they think, even when you might think normally a president would say, oh, we'll respect the Supreme Court, and they did a balanced decision. But what's interesting about this judgment is the Supreme Court has 9 justices, 6 of them appointed by Republicans, 3 by Democratic presidents, and the Republicans split straight down the middle, including 2 people that actually Donald Trump appointed in his first term. So this isn't just a straight, you know, sort of liberal judges up against Donald Trump. You know, these are people who were appointed by a Republican president.
But he's sort of ended up calling them RHINOs, hasn't he? Republicans in name only.
Yeah, RHINO is one of his favourite things to go to. But it also reflects a real debate that's going on in Republican circles in the US. You know, you've got those who are very much Trump-aligned, who are, you know, their big pitch is towards the Rust Belt of the United States, what we would call the red wall here. You know, places that have not seen benefits of industrial changes over the last 40, 50 years. In fact, quite the opposite. As opposed to, let's say, your sort of Tea Party Republicans who are smaller government, smaller state, don't like taxes, including tariffs. So you've got that debate very much going on in Republican circles. But, you know, how you take forward an economic agenda where you've got someone who's very much keen to rebuild an industrial base and use tariffs to do that versus those who actually don't like the idea of taxes and very much believe in free markets and smaller government.
There's nothing more important than keeping your money and your identity safe online. And with so many VPN options available, choosing the right one can be pretty daunting. But this video's sponsor, ExpressVPN, is making the choice easier for GB News viewers. ExpressVPN is offering up to 75% off, plus 4 extra months free. That's top-level security from just £2.49 a month, and you're covered by their 30-day money-back guarantee. So just click the link in this video's description or scan the QR code now. Remember, when you're online, you are often sharing personal data, so hackers can steal your information, your passwords, your photos, and your bank details in just seconds. But ExpressVPN encrypts your connection, making it virtually impossible for hackers to access your personal information. So why choose ExpressVPN? Well, it couldn't be easier to use. With just one click, you are protected. And ExpressVPN uses military-grade AES 256 encryption, which is the same standard trusted by the US government to guard their classified information. With their new tiered plans, you can protect up to 14 devices at once and manage passwords securely. Live chat support is available 24/7, and it typically connects you in under a minute with a real person. Click the link in this video's description or scan the QR code to get up to 75% off ExpressVPN, plus 4 months extra for free. Start protecting yourself today with ExpressVPN.
Well, Trump's always, I mean, that was an absolute masterclass in how to turn bad news into good news or make it sound that way. The question is whether or not he can convince the electorate enough to, because the midterms are coming up. I mean, they're not till November, but Americans campaign all year, don't they, really? So this is part of trying to look good.
Absolutely, and let's also think that actually there's plenty of people still with their eye on 28 and the US presidential, both for the Democratic nomination and for the Republican Party's nomination as well. You know, there is that sort of almost permanent campaign going on in the US. But yet but looks like he can put something in place for 150 days under the Trade Act, I think it's 1974, the US piece of legislation. But then it may need to be renewed in Congress. And perhaps some of the rhetoric you've seen over the last 24 hours in relation to Supreme Court judgment will be because he's starting to think about what he will then say to Republicans in the lower house, in the Congress, what House Representatives, what are you going to do? How are you going to vote? And if you vote with him, you'll get a lovely bit of praise. If you vote against renewal of those tariffs, you're going to be the rhinos, the thing that's blocking the Trump agenda.
What I don't understand is he says it's going to bring in a lot, you know, this 10% will bring in loads of money to the economy. It'll bring in more money than the other tariffs. But isn't that money from the Americans are going to have to pay out in the first place in terms of the tariff charge?
Yeah, well, ultimately, when a tariff is a tax paid on an import, you know, you would have, in theory, been able to buy that good 10% cheaper if you hadn't had to pay the tariff that effectively is wrapped up in the price of the goods you're buying, or you end up buying more expensive goods that are domestically produced. That's partly what Trump's looking for people to do.
So in effect, he's sort of praising an increase in money, but it's money that people are going to have to pay out that they don't want to pay out in America.
It is a bit, although remember, Trump's goal here is to get people buying American.
Yeah.
So what the tariff does is it makes the Chinese product slightly more expensive than the domestic product, and that is what Trump is hoping to do. He wants to see the US re-industrialise. He wants to see less reliance on imports, particularly from China. And actually, there is a bit of a strategic logic to that as well. If you see China as your biggest threat to your country overall, you do not want to be absolutely dependent on it for pretty much everything you use within your country. So that's ultimately his goal. That's what he's trying to do to his base, and this is part of it. But yes,
but if that happened over here, I mean, to put it, because I know there's a lot of people saying it's great, stick it to him, Trump, you know, he's standing up for America. But if that happened over here, we'd say, well, we're in a cost of living crisis and you're just making everything more expensive.
Well, ultimately, we do have, you know, tariffs and agreements in place as well. And of course, if you look at when we were in the European Union, we had a raft of tariffs on stuff that actually we didn't make. Remember Liam Fox, a former trade secretary, reviewing tariffs and actually removing things like the tariff there was on ironing boards, because we don't actually make ironing boards. There's no one who makes ironing boards, certainly at that time in the UK. But there were manufacturers in Eastern Europe. By dropping the tariff, yes, they became cheaper, but that was because the tariff had been in place to try and protect Eastern European manufacturers of particular products
no doubt that's
while we
what
were in a
this
single
government
market.
would argue. We're part of a global financial community, and we should look after other countries as well as our own.
We do. Although it's worth
Or
noting,
even better than our own.
Yeah, although it's worth noting the EU has some of the biggest tariff wars in the world. So when you hear people in Europe commenting on some of this, just remember that they also practice exactly this type of politics.
While we're sticking with the stuff which is related to the United States, can we talk Chagos? Because I mean, are we coming or going with the Chagos Islands? Because a lot of it seems to be, although we've got our own rows over here about what on earth should be going on, it seems to be at the moment entirely dependent on what America allows us to do, and that is about as clear as mud at the moment.
Yeah, I think it seems to be, depending on whether you speak to the White House or the State Department, their version of the Foreign Office. And the White House, when it comments, is very much this is a disastrous deal. Don't give Chagos away. And the State Department is perhaps a bit more like our Foreign Office, more interested in how you work with international partners, although I think that for the US and for us, there's an increasing question about the settlement post-war was based on the idea that the prevailing force in international affairs would be pushing towards democracy. Now, increasingly, the prevailing force in parts of international affairs is the People's Republic of China, and in particular, President Xi, who has no interest whatsoever in human rights.
And at the same time, as the Telegraph points out on their front page today, it would appear that actually we don't have to give them away, as we've been led to believe. We actually don't need to.
No, every time the government puts up a legal argument that says we have to give them away or face some dire consequence, quite quickly it emerges that advice looks shaky and poor. And I think certainly many Labour MPs who've been pushed through the lobby to vote for this will be increasingly questioning the judgment of the Attorney General. His background hardly inspires confidence in terms of standing up for British interests, and it'll be interesting to see if Keir Starmer, A, sticks with this deal, and B, sticks with his Attorney General.
Just before we let you go, what is your opinion now? Do we know what the official Tory party line is as well on whether we should allow Chagosians to return to their homeland?
Well, I'm not a spokesperson for the Conservative Party now.
No, but you've got plenty of friends who are still in the party.
I have got plenty of friends. Look, you know, I salute the guys who've gone out. Actually, this is, in one case, it's someone returning to the island he was born on and then was forcibly evicted from. You know, you couldn't get any worse. And for me, if they wish to re-establish their life on the Chagos Islands, there's obviously challenges to doing that they are aware of. Then good luck to them for doing so. I just find it rather interesting that this is the one group of boat people Keir Starmer seems to want to take very strong action against.
Yes.
Yes, he was very quick off the mark, wasn't he?
Yeah.